We've all experienced it, right? That undeniable urge to set a goal.
Oh, yeah.
A New Year's resolution, maybe a career ambition, or even just, I don't know, mastering a new skill.
Definitely.
We map it out. Clear objective, dedication, hard work, and then success. It feels like the only way forward, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels logical.
But what if that clear path, especially for those, really ambitious goals, what if it's actually a mirage?
It's a genuinely thought-provoking question. And it's one that Kenneth O. Stanley and Joel Lehman explore in their book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, The Myth of the Objective.
Okay.
So today we're embarking on a deep dive into their surprising paradox. Ambitious objectives, far from being helpful, can actually become pretty significant obstacles
Obstacles to what?
to breakthrough achievements, true discovery, and maybe even personal happiness.
Wow. Okay. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack this counterintuitive idea.
Yeah, let's dig in.
We're going to show you how profoundly objectives influence, well, everything from finding a date to the cutting edge of scientific innovation.
Right.
And then maybe offer you a completely new lens through which to view progress and achievement. So let's explore this.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Objectives are just everywhere, aren't they? I mean, from the moment we're little kids, it starts.
Uh-huh.
Think about it. Kindergarten assessments, they're designed to measure progress,
Yeah.
always towards some predefined target.
Absolutely. And it just keeps going, doesn't it? You walk into any bookstore, flip through a magazine, and what do you see?
Goals, goals, goals.
Exactly. Articles telling you how to lose 15 pounds, start a company, find a date, or, make $1 million. Pretty much anything considered worth doing gets framed as an objective.
And it's not just us as individuals. Institutions do it too.
Yeah.
Schools set objectives like getting high test scores.
Right. Or nations aiming for low crime rates or reduced carbon emissions.
And professions are built around them. Engineers work with really rigorous specifications. Scientists need clear objectives to get funding. Corporations are always chasing profit targets. Even artists, often mentally conceive a design and set its realization as their goal.
It's just baked into everything.
It is. And, there's a deep comfort in this, isn't there? Objectives offer a kind of reassuring predictability against life's inherent chaos.
Yeah, I get that.
This can-do philosophy tells us that simply setting an objective creates possibility, and then dedication will inevitably lead to success. It makes perfect sense why we cling to it so tightly.
I can certainly see the appeal of that clockwork dependability, as the book calls it. But okay, if objectives offer this comfort, why are the authors arguing against them, especially for those really ambitious goals? Is there a downside to all this objective optimism?
There is, yeah. And it's a significant hidden cost. This, let's call it objective mania, often leads to, legions of measurements, assessments, and metrics that frankly make us kind of slaves to our objectives.
Right. Feels like that sometimes.
And this limits our freedom. And crucially, it sort of robs us of the chance for playful discovery. We end up questioning, what are we actually giving up in exchange for such objective optimism?
So this isn't about being pessimistic about ambition itself, but maybe about finding a different route, a more effective one.
Precisely. This deep dive isn't meant to be pessimistic at all. It's about revealing a different path to achievement, one that operates without objectives, or at least without being rigidly bound by them.
Okay.
It's about reclaiming that freedom to explore creatively and serendipitous discovery.
Serendipity. Finding things by chance.
Exactly. And it's important to clarify here, this isn't really about modest goals, like, say, increasing efficiency by 5% or upgrading software.
Right. That seemed pretty straightforward.
Objectives work perfectly well for those. The arguments become really most interesting when we talk about truly ambitious objectives, things like curing cancer or creating human-level AI or, achieving time travel, the big stuff.
Okay, that's a really powerful distinction. So if these grand objectives can actually be a trap, what's actually going on? How should we even think about achievement if not through objectives? Does the book offer a different framework?
It absolutely does. The authors introduce this really incredible metaphor of achievement as a process of discovery within a vast search space.
A search space? It
Imagine it as like a giant room in which every image conceivable is hovering.
Okay. So like the space of all possible images, maybe, from the Mona Lisa all the way down to just random static.
Exactly. Or think of the room of all possible inventions, from super simple tools to incredibly complex computers.
Got it. And within these vast spaces, what we've already discovered or explored acts as a kind of stepping stone, like a portal to new ideas.
Right. You got it. And here's the core paradox. This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Ambitious objectives can actually become obstacles because the stepping stones that lead to ambitious objectives tend to be pretty strange.
Strange how?
They often don't resemble the final product at all. The objective, in a way, becomes a kind of false compass.
Whoa, so the very thing we're aiming for can actually mislead us about how to get there. Can you give us some examples of that? That sounds wild.
History is absolutely full of them.
Yeah.
Let's take vacuum tubes.
Okay, vacuum tubes, old tech.
Right. Thomas Edison and others initially investigated electricity for lighting. Much later, John Ambrose Fleming refined tubes specifically for radio waves. Decades later, completely different people, scientists, realized these same vacuum tubes could help build computers, like the ENIS.
Ah, okay.
And the crucial point is, no one who had the objective of building a computer back in, say, 1750 would have thought, okay, first I must invent a vacuum tube.
Right, the connection just wasn't there.
Not at all. The stepping stone was laid by people with completely different aims.
That's fascinating. It's like the initial invention was a key, but for a lock nobody even knew existed yet.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And the same goes for the engine and airplanes. The first engine wasn't invented with flying machines in mind.
But the Wright brothers needed it.
Desperately needed it.
Wow.
Or microwave technology that came out of work on magnetron power tubes for radars during World War II.
Okay.
It was only when Percy Spencer, a scientist working with magnetrons, noticed one melted a chocolate bar in his pocket.
No way.
Yeah. Only then did its application to ovens become clear. Pure serendipity.
So the objective itself can actually distract you from its own stepping stones because those stepping stones often look completely different from the final product.
That's core idea.
The key discoveries were often perfected by people who didn't even have that ultimate objective in mind. Wow, that really makes the search space seem completely unpredictable.
Precisely. It is completely unpredictable.
This really turns conventional wisdom on its head. So if we're not aiming for a fixed target, what does that mean for how we approach breakthrough achievements? Is it really, as the book suggests, a victory for the aimless?
It kind of is, yeah.
Yeah.
The authors argue that having no objective can lead to the greatest discoveries of all. It's about finding this third way, which they call victory for the aimless. And it's not just theoretical. You see it play out in countless fascinating career paths.
Okay, give us some examples. Who achieved greatness by seemingly, not aiming directly for it?
Okay, think about Johnny Depp.
The actor.
Yeah, he was in a mildly successful band, right? He wanted to make music.
Yeah.
But his bass player's sister, who happened to be a makeup artist, introduced him to acting. He was just open to opportunities, and that led him down an entirely different, incredibly successful path he wasn't aiming for.
Or John Grisham. He was a criminal defense attorney for 10 years.
Right.
He only started writing A Time to Kill after he overheard testimony from a young rape victim in court. I mean, most aspiring writers don't think, okay, law school is my stepping stone.
Exactly. Or J.K. Rowling. She was a bilingual secretary and an English teacher before Harry Potter took off.
Right.
Haruki Murakami ran a coffee house and jazz bar. He actually credits that time with giving him space to observe and brood before he started writing novels at 29.
The Colonel Sanders, that's a classic.
Oh, yeah. Tried steamboating, insurance, farming, all sorts of things before he even started cooking chicken at his gas station, which eventually led to KFC.
These aren't just like isolated incidents either, are they? Didn't a study find something about this?
Yes, a peer-reviewed study actually found that nearly 2/3 of adults attribute some aspect of their career choice to serendipity.
2/3. Wow.
It really highlights that idea that being open and flexible to opportunity is sometimes more important than knowing what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does. Richard Wiseman did this interesting experiment. He gave people a newspaper and told them to count the photos.
Okay.
The highly focused individuals took much longer because they completely missed a large message printed right on page 2 that said, "Stop counting." There are 43 photographs in this newspaper.
Huh. So their focus on the objective counting actually blinded them to the answer sitting right there.
Exactly. Their focus made them miss it.
I can definitely see how that intense focus could make you miss something obvious. It's almost, blinding. This idea even applies to something really personal, like finding love. You hear that phrase, right? Loretta Young said, "Love isn't something you find. Love is something that finds you."
And having these really rigid, preconceived notions about an ideal partner, like an objective, often leads to unsatisfying results.
Hmm.
Because the true nature of great discoveries, even in relationships, is often way different from how we imagined it.
Yeah, the checklist approach rarely works out.
Right. And this also brings us to the idea of unstructured play, but for adults.
Play for
Yeah,
adults.
think about Joseph Herscher. He builds these incredibly intricate Rube Goldberg machines.
Oh, this crazy contraptions.
Yeah, with no real necessity other than being fun to watch. They do simple tasks in ridiculously complicated ways. But his work has gotten millions of views, media appearances.
Just from playing around.
Pretty much. Children need time to explore without specific objectives. And the argument is maybe adults do too, because we don't know which stepping stones might lead to something interesting.
And it's not just individuals doing this. Entire companies have found huge success by basically ditching their initial objectives and pivoting, right?
Absolutely. YouTube is a classic example. Started as a video dating site.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, pivoted to just general video sharing. Flickr began as a much smaller feature inside a social online game.
Huh.
And Nintendo, their story is wild, started making playing cards way back in 1889.
Playing cards?
Yep. Then they tried taxi services, love hotels, even instant rice.
Love hotels. Seriously.
Seriously, before finally moving into toys and then eventually video games.
That's incredible. Talk about not having a clear objective from the start.
Exactly. These examples really showcase a willingness to serve serendipity and to follow passions or whims to their logical conclusions, even if it means abandoning the original plan.
Okay, so the idea of non-objective discovery or just following interestingness sounds really compelling anecdotally. But is there any actual, science behind it? This deep dive points to something called pick breeder. You described it as a bizarre concept.
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre but fascinating. It's essentially a website where users could breed pictures, almost like you'd breed animals.
Breed pictures? How does that even work?
Well, users manipulate what you could call a kind of digital genetic code for images, introducing slight mutations with each generation.
Okay.
But the unique feature was that users could then continue breeding images that previous users had already evolved. So you could build on someone else's creation.
Ah, like branching off.
Exactly, branching. This allowed for hundreds of generations of evolution and enabled the creation of incredibly complex and meaningful images, like a recognizable car starting from just random blobs.
Wow. Okay, so people are just evolving these images.
Yeah.
What was the big revelation?
Here's the kicker. When they set up a computer program to try and breed a specific target image, like that car, by always selecting the images that looked most similar to it, it failed miserably.
It failed.
Yeah. The study found that the only time these images are being discovered is when they are not the objective. The users who actually found these impressive images, like the car or a skull, were almost always people who weren't specifically looking for them.
That's really profound. So the direct objective-driven route failed, but the sort of meandering, accidental discovery succeeded.
Exactly. Ken, one of the authors, specifically found the pick breeder car image when he was actually trying to breed alien faces.
Alien faces, okay.
Yeah, through random mutations, the alien face's eyes gradually moved down the image, and then suddenly it was apparent that the eyes could be wheels.
No way.
The alien face was just the right stepping stone, but it looked nothing like a car initially. And this isn't just one anecdote. It's a general trend they observed on pick breeder.
So the stepping stones rarely look like the final products.
Almost never. The system works because it has no unified objective. Everyone is following their own instincts, their own sense of what's interesting at that moment.
That makes so much sense when you put it that way. It's like a diverse, decentralized search for novelty, not a focused hunt, for one thing.
Yeah.
And this leads to something called novelty search in a more, scientific AI context, right?
It does, yeah. Novelty search is a scientific approach, often used in robotics research. For instance, imagine a robot in a simple hallway.
Okay.
Instead of programming it with the objective, get to the door, you just tell it to do something novel, anything it hasn't done before.
So it's not looking for an exit, it's just trying to explore new movements. That sounds inefficient. How does that lead to anything useful?
Well, here's the magic. By simply exploring every possible simple novel movement, like, crashing into the left wall, crashing into the right wall, spinning in place, it eventually exhausts those easy novelties.
Okay.
So to continue doing something novel, it's effectively forced to figure out more complex behaviors, like how to actually move down the hallway without hitting the walls.
Ah, it's an emergent behavior, not the programmed goal.
Exactly. It learns to navigate, not because it was told to, but because navigating becomes the only way to keep discovering novelty. Novelty search isn't easily fooled or deceived, like objective search can be, it naturally leads from simplicity to complexity, and it diverges. It explores broadly, much like natural evolution or human innovation often does.
That's fascinating.
It really shows that pressing forward towards a far-off objective can't be a great idea when in many simple problems that approach fares worse than searching for nothing in particular.
Okay, this counterintuitive idea clearly has massive societal implications. Let's start with education. How does this objective obsession, as the book calls it, hurt our schools and students?
Well, the focus on objectives in education, especially through standardized tests and accountability measures, often dehumanizes and mechanizes what once was creative. It can stifle genuine learning.
And it leads to deception, right? Like teaching to the test instead of teaching the subject.
Exactly. Or worse, outright gaming the system. It reminds me of Campbell's law.
What's that?
It's the idea that the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decision-making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures, and the more apt it will be to distort and corrupt the social processes it is intended to monitor.
Right, like those examples. The British offering a bounty for dead cobras in India only for people to start breeding cobras to collect the reward.
Precisely. Or executives chasing short-term stock prices instead of long-term company health because their bonuses are tied to quarterly numbers.
So standardized tests, like the ones under No Child Left Behind or maybe Common Core, they become these faulty compasses.
In many ways, yes. An accurate measure of skullness in Pick Breeder doesn't actually help you find the skull if the stepping stones look like alien faces. Focusing only on the test score might make you miss the actual learning path.
And trying to make everything uniform, while it sounds good for equality, maybe it stifles the diversity of approaches and teacher autonomy.
Absolutely. That kind of uniformity is often described by the authors as a surefire way to slow down progress, because progress often comes from unexpected directions, from diversity.
And it makes you wonder, if the goal is just to make all students conform to this one narrow test, aren't we losing out on all the serendipitous discoveries that different teaching approaches or different student interests might uncover?
That's the core concern. Contrast that with Finland's education system, for example. They grant much greater teacher autonomy. They don't really use standardized tests in the same way.
And they get amazing results.
Consistently world-class results.
Yeah.
So the alternative proposed is more like a treasure hunter approach for education.
Treasure hunter.
Yeah, maybe teachers create portfolios of interesting student work or innovative teaching methods, assessed by panels of peers. The focus shifts to sharing diverse ideas and interesting stepping stones, rather than just hitting a uniform test score.
Exploring different methods rather than converging on one potentially deceptive objective.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on. Scientific innovation and funding seem to suffer from similar problems, right? Funding often relies heavily on clear objectives and tends to reward consensus. Is that also acting as a false compass?
It often can, yes. The book argues that attracting a unanimous vote in science could be a sign of nothing more than echoing the status quo. Sometimes, maybe rewarding maximal disagreement makes more sense.
Disagreement. Really?
Well, the idea is that a truly interesting idea is likely to split votes. Think of Darwin's theory. It was initially dismissed or ignored by many established experts. Funding only consensus might filter out the truly novel breakthroughs.
Okay. That's provocative.
It's about fostering a healthy disunity of ideas, encouraging diverse approaches and challenges to the status quo, because that diversity is often what drives progress.
And you mentioned these grand projects earlier, like Japan's big fifth-generation computer systems project or the U.S. war on cancer. They often seem to fail in their direct aims.
They often do, though they might spin off valuable unintended breakthroughs along the way. The moon landing is often cited as a counterexample, but the authors argue that was arguably one stepping stone away.
Yeah.
Technologically, at the time it was set as a goal. It wasn't quite the same leap into the unknown as, say, curing all cancers.
And it's also problematic to judge basic research projects solely by their immediate predicted impact, isn't it? I remember politicians mocking studies like monkeys get high or shrimp on a treadmill.
Right, but that misses the whole point of basic science. Pure mathematics, for instance, things like group theory or cryptography, often seem completely abstract, but then have unexpected, profound, real-world applications years or even decades later that absolutely no one could have predicted at the outset.
So the alternative for scientific funding would be what? Fund interesting projects, even if their importance or path to success isn't immediately obvious.
Absolutely. Fund researchers with a track record of making interesting discoveries, maybe with fewer strings attached, like the MacArthur Fellowships, the so-called genius grants. Give them funding with no questions asked.
Foster that disunity to drive progress.
Exactly. Embrace the unpredictable nature of discovery instead of trying to force it down a narrow, predefined path.
Okay, this also seems highly relevant to business innovation. You mentioned investors typically prefer those realistic objectives, things that are just one stepping stone away.
Yeah, that's generally true. It feels safer.
But there must be a huge opportunity in embracing this non-objective discovery idea in the corporate world, too.
Oh, definitely. The book suggests things like interactive catalogs. Imagine for furniture or clothing, where a customer could sort of breed designs, like on PickBreeder.
Whoa, so the customers become part of the design process.
Yeah. It turns shopping into a kind of collaborative search with no unified objective. The company builds a stockpile of discoveries, driven by customer interest. And customers get products closer to what they find genuinely appealing, even if they couldn't articulate it beforehand. It's like being a collaborative treasure hunter.
And we already talked about companies like YouTube, Flickr, Nintendo. Their success came from that willingness to pivot, to serve serendipity.
Exactly. Following passions or whims to their logical conclusions, even if it means junking the original business plan.
It even applies to art and design. You mentioned artists feeling pressure to justify their work with objectives, but art history seems to contradict that, right?
Totally. Major art movements think Impressionism to Expressionism to Surrealism.
Mhm.
They clearly evolved through these serendipitous chains, not because someone had a grand objective like invent Surrealism.
Right. Each innovation was just interesting in its own right, and that opened up future possibilities nobody planned for.
Precisely. The book mentions an anecdote about a student at the Rhode Island School of Design who felt incredibly validated after hearing these ideas, realizing that the greatest explorations have no goals.
Yeah, there's a freedom in that.
A liberation. There's no need to justify taking an axe to pristine metal and rusting it, for example, if the process and the result are interesting and thought-provoking. The value is in the exploration itself, the stepping stone it creates.
Okay, so if we pull all this together, it really seems like clinging too tightly to those overly ambitious objectives offers little more than the illusion of control.
Yeah, that sums it up well. We never really had the kind of precise control over these complex, winding paths that we thought we did.
The future is just too unpredictable.
The winding stepping stones along the path to the future are beyond our ability to predict. So instead of that rigid, objective-driven search, the authors encourage embracing the treasure hunter mindset.
Treasure hunter. Meaning,
You search for clues, hints that something is nearby that may be worth finding, like a mysterious but sweet aroma. You follow what seems intriguing.
and this involves mixing that idea of novelty we talked about with interestingness, like following your gut feeling for what's compelling, even if it seems subjective or weird to others.
Yes, and following just those kinds of gut feelings is often arguably more principled than being objective, especially when pursuing discovery or innovation. Because your sense of interesting might actually be tuned into the potential of nearby stepping stones in a way that a fixed objective isn't. True innovators seem to notice those delicate moments when new possibilities suddenly snap into view, like Marcus Persson, realizing a whole new kind of video game was possible by combining concepts from existing games.
Leading to Minecraft.
Yeah, Minecraft, a game with famously no explicit goals that became this massive cultural phenomenon and even an educational platform.
Or Steve Jobs seeing the treasure in the moment with the potential of the iPad, seeing it as just barely coming into view from one stepping stone away, building on existing touch tech and mobile computing ideas.
Right. And the Wright brothers, remember, they were bicycle manufacturers. They saw airplanes almost as bicycles in the sky. It was a different kind of motivation than simply chasing an abstract objective of claiming the skies. They observed, they tinkered, they found the interesting connections, and built upon them step by step.
So the message is, if there's no destination, there can't be a right path.
Exactly. There are just paths, plural.
The liberation here is to simply do things because they're interesting. And maybe if the path you're on does not resemble where you thought you'd be, you're probably doing something right.
Yeah, because you're likely off the beaten path, exploring potentially richer territory where the truly novel stepping stones might lie.
And society actually benefits immensely when individuals diverge and explore different paths. It's a really compelling thought. It's in your interest that some do not follow the path you think is right, because one day they will build the stepping stones that lead to your greatest discovery. We need that diversity of exploration.
We absolutely do.
So I guess the deepest insight from this whole deep dive is this really powerful paradox. To achieve our highest, most ambitious goals, maybe we actually need to be willing to abandon them or at least hold them much more loosely.
Abandon the objective, not the search.
Right. This isn't about giving up on ambition itself, but understanding that true greatness, true breakthroughs, often emerge not from hitting a fixed target, but from the fearless exploration of the unknown.
One interesting stepping stone at a time. Following curiosity, following novelty, following that scent of treasure.
So the final thought for you listening is, what unexpected stepping stone might you choose to explore next? Not because it leads somewhere specific, but simply because it feels interesting.